Hello and welcome, fellow lifelong learners. Thanks for joining me for One More Thing, a radio show all about cultivating our most valuable asset, our mind, and fostering a sense of curiosity to learn one more thing. We feature passionate practitioners and seasoned experts in numerous areas of interest for lifelong learners of all ages. One More Thing is sponsored by Kiffin & Company, a corporate learning and talent development consulting firm, and I'm your host, Kiffin McCoy Albert, a certified professional in talent development, learning advocate, and your fellow lifelong learner. Welcome to the show. Do you remember making a family tree as a project in school? I vaguely do, and I think that it only went back as far as grandparents and only branched as far as siblings and cousins. For some kids, that would be a very small family tree, and others much larger, especially if there were divorces and remarrying along with step and half siblings. Mine was fairly large, even though we were only capturing 3 generations at that time. Now, I'm really fortunate to know a lot about my mom's maternal side and some about her paternal side, thanks to an uncle who spearheaded some pretty significant genealogical research. And my dad's maternal side, thanks to one of his first cousins, who is more like an aunt to me. Knowing part of my history, going back multiple generations, gives me a sense of rootedness in this world. If you find genealogy interesting or want some inspiration to get started, then this episode will be great for you. When we come back, I will introduce you to my guest today, who is going to share about his experience with and a little advice about genealogical research. Stay tuned. Today's episode sponsor is John St. Clair Photography. Dreaming of capturing your love story against a breathtaking backdrop? Or maybe you're looking to freeze those precious moments of your senior's final year or a joy-filled gathering of your family? Look no further. John St. Clair Photography specializes in destination weddings, senior and family portraits, sports action shots, and stunning nature photography. Whether it's a picturesque waterfront wedding, a high-energy sports event, or a serene family portrait in your favorite park, let us bring your vision to life with creativity and passion. Don't wait, make your memories unforgettable. Visit johnstclairphoto.com or find us on our socials. John St. Clair Photography, where every picture tells your story. Dr. John St. Clair is a retired educator who has turned his photography hobby into a second career. While teaching high school math, he coached girls basketball and boys soccer. As a college professor, he was one of the first to teach mathematics online in Tennessee and eventually became the executive director of technical services for Tennessee's first virtual university degree program. He went on to serve as the director of distance learning at the University of Mary Washington in Fredericksburg, Virginia, before taking on the role of senior manager of consulting services at Desire to Learn, an international educational software company. During his career, Dr. St. Clair delivered many papers and presentations at regional, national, and international conferences. He has published papers in several international scholarly journals and has even contributed a chapter in an education textbook. I mentioned that he has turned his photography hobby into a second career. However, even since high school, photography has been more than just a hobby. Now in retirement, he has been able to focus entirely on his photography business, concentrating on sports, weddings, high school seniors, and family portraits. His photographs have been published by Max Preps, a division of CBS Sports, newspapers, websites, and even on book covers. Dr. St. Clair also enjoys bird photography, gardening, and of course, genealogy. I know we are all anxious to talk to him about that very thing. John, welcome to One More Thing.
Well, good morning, Kiffin. I'm glad to be here.
Well, first of all, I guess let's just talk about what is genealogy in case there's anybody who doesn't know what that even is.
Well, genealogy is the study of ancestors and all the relations that your family has, your family tree.
Yeah, most of us, even in elementary school, did some sort of, even like the finger painting with the, the family tree. So yeah, just genealogy, really just the study of your ancestry and your family tree. Very good. Well, how did you get interested? You're a math teacher by profession, a photographer by love and career. So how did you get into genealogy?
Well, a couple of reasons, really, kind of related to photography. As a photographer, I'm, interested in the visual. We have a large family reunion in our family every year, and there are just 50 to 100 people there usually, and some come, some go, and you see them once a year or once every 2 or 3 years, and it was kind of hard for me to keep up with everybody. So I wanted a visual picture of whose kid was who was whose uncle, and all of that. And so I thought to myself, well, if I had a nice family tree structure, some kind of visual I could look at, then that could help me remember my cousins, and I'd be able to refer to them by name instead of AU. Also, in any family, I'm sure you have myths that are in your family, like a common one. And in our family, we always have heard that we had some Cherokee Indian blood. Well, I don't, accept things without actually seeing sources and references. So I wanted to see, is this true? Is it not true? Could I find some documentation? And so you have a lot of resources that you can get to when you start in the genealogy to see who's related to who. And that was another factor in me trying to get into this.
That makes sense. Yeah, when I was reading a little bit about genealogy, I know a little bit about it and have some interest in it, but I was reading just a little bit to kind of see. I actually just sort of Googled, why is genealogy important, just to see like what was the result that I got. And one of the things it talked about is, of course, that connection. So that's kind of what you were talking about, is that connection of who is who and understanding those the family tree. But it also talked about that it often helped increase compassion, and it let people understand the stories of their ancestors. So you might hear a story about an ancestor that it's just sort of almost an adjective, a description of that person. But then when you find out about the story related to that and find out why that description is there, it's sort of an aha moment, and maybe it's even a compassion moment if it is something that's maybe not as a positive of a description or something. Have you found anything like that within your research?
Yeah, I can think of a couple of examples. One of the people that I always looked up to in my life was my maternal grandfather, and he had quite a storied life. He married my grandmother, who was an immigrant from Ireland, and he went to law school. He played for the University of Alabama football team. He left law school in order to support a family, married young, and worked in various careers in education, school principal, coach. And he had some hard luck in his life too. He eventually started working with he worked as a county agent, and then he eventually started working with his brother as construction workers, or I don't know exactly what they did in the construction field, but they were carpenter, and eventually ran into poor health. And of course, as we all do, he eventually passed on. He had an interesting life filled with many experiences. And I only knew him in my early years. I remember walking with him hand in hand down the sidewalk and thinking, what a great person this is. And I look back, and through his life, I can tell that he went through the Depression. He he experienced wartime. Most of his children were soldiers in World War II. So he had a life filled with joys and sorrows, just like many of the rest of us. And I really felt like this is a guy I really wish I'd spent more time with.
That's interesting. Yeah, that makes you want to wish that you had more time, or had any time at all.
Yeah,
potentially with some ancestors. That's very interesting. Well, I know that when you start talking about, delving into history, there's a show that I'm completely blanking on right now, but I know a lot of celebrities have been on it, where they go, do you know what I'm talking about? Where they go to find out there.
I can't remember the name of that show.
I know. I can't remember either. But I know that some of them have been surprised at some of the family connections that they had. Some of them have talked about being fearful of what they would find. I know that I have a friend who very progressive in thought and was worried about digging into her history, worried that she would find some unpleasantness being from the South and all. And so did you have any of those thoughts or fears as you started looking into your history?
Well, I'm kind of open-minded, so I thought that might happen. Many of many of my ancestors were just poor dirt farmers in the South, and so they would not have been slave owners. But you go a little further back, and I think there was some of that in my ancestry. A couple of things that I wanted to find out but haven't yet is that you remember the story of Braveheart, the movie with who starred in that movie?
Is that Mel Gibson?
Yeah, Mel Gibson. Yeah. So in Braveheart, one of the characters was Robert the Bruce. Well, in real life, he had some lieutenants that were named St. Clair from Scotland, and I believe that there's a connection there, but I haven't got it totally nailed down yet. Another kind of surprise is there was a revolutionary general named Arthur St. Clair from Scotland and was an officer in the British Armed Forces, but changed over to the American Armed Forces and was a general, and eventually was one of the presidents of the Continental Congress. Arthur St. Clair, I believe, is related, but I haven't nailed it down yet. One thing that did surprise me is that I went back 4 great-grandfathers back, and there was a fellow named John St. Clair, and from South Carolina. And what I found out was that he may or may not have really been a St. Clair, because as a young boy, somewhere between 7 and 10 years old, he was found running wild in the forest. So he was kind of semi-savage, eating raw fish and whatever he could find, running in the forest. And he was taken in by the St. Clair family. So who knows what his actual genealogy. Now, I do know several more generations back from him about the St. Clairs, but not really blood relatives.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's really hard. And I know when we talked before that forensic genealogy is not the avenue that you've pursued, not the purpose, but that's a really interesting one where they've done this DNA stuff, and then they figure out there was I think it was a Netflix documentary called like DNA Detective, I think is the name of it, and they talked about how some crimes are being solved. But one of the episodes that I watched, I remember being fascinated because they ended up figuring out the general vicinity of this person's heritage, and then through further investigation outside of the DNA, through things like some of the ancestry type things that we have online, they determined that this was a male suspect that they were looking for, and the mother had divorced, or perhaps the husband had died, I'm not sure, remarried, and that second husband adopted the son. So the names didn't really coincide until they really investigated. And so, gosh, I just think about how with all of the newer generational changes of that kind of thing, like how is that going to just really impact genealogy research?
That's right. And of course, you have, even in normal families, you have dalliances, which where the gene pool might not exactly follow the official legal heritage. And you mentioned names. That's wild issue in genealogy, especially in my family. My name is John Robert St. Clair III, and that's not really a common name, you would think. But when I was teaching community college as a math professor, I happened to notice online, I did a search for John St. Clair, and there was another John Robert St. Clair III teaching math in a community college in Michigan.
Wow.
And John, of course, is a common name, and there are like 15 or 20 John St. Clairs in the family, not necessarily even direct descendants, but, cousins and children of cousins who they liked the name John and they used it. And then there's the last name. So my name for me is spelled ST_Clair. Well, in modern computer times, lots of input boxes will not take a period or a space. And so I have to spell my name either ST space Clair or STCLAIR with no space. And then as you go further back, the St. Clairs were sometimes called Sinclairs, St. Clair with an E on the end. There's even Sinklers, Sinkler. A lot of this is because people were uneducated in the past and they would spell things the way they wanted. So if your ancestor had a particular accent that he said St. Clair, but it sounded like Sinkler, then you'd spell it that way.
Right.
And then another issue is census takers. So that census takers who were not part of your family and didn't know how your family traditionally spelled names might have heard you say Sinclair, and who knows how they wrote it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of spelling issues, just a lot of possible red herrings you can run down in genealogy.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I feel like in the conversation so far, there's been a couple of pieces of advice maybe that have come out of this. And one of those is going in open-minded, prepared that you might find something unexpected, perhaps something not as positive as you would like, that kind of thing. So going in with an open mindset. Two, going in with the understanding that you may have to think a little bit outside the box, especially around spellings and about that people could be adopted or second marriage and that kind of thing. So those are two that I think have come out of it. But what are some other pieces of advice that you have for somebody who wants to research their family history?
One of the big resources for me has become newspaper archives. Ancestry has an agreement with newspapers.com, but there's also other newspaper archiving services that you can subscribe to. The Library of Congress. Google maintains a newspaper archive for newspapers that have gone out of copyright, so 95 years old or older. And curiously enough, if you just do a regular Google search, I don't think they have that indexed. And you can't rely on all of these newspaper archive services being indexed in a search mechanism like Google. It's partly because they're behind paywalls and so forth. One of the things I did was go in and read the Prattville newspapers along about 1880 through 1920 or so, when my grandparents would have been young people. And I wanted to see if, my grandfather had placed first in the county fair or whatever. So I did read the Prattville newspapers in that time and found lots of little tidbits, like, the social page, would always say, Aunt Sally came to visit Aunt Bertha, during the weekend, and those kind of things. And not particularly earth-shaking events, but just interesting tidbits that you'd find out about your family. So newspaper archives are a big resource for me.
And with what you were just saying, are most of those paid subscriptions?
Yes, that's right.
But even if someone was trying to do what they could do for free, going to their local library or like you were saying, the one in Alabama for your grandparents, if you can get to the town where you want to look, generally that's going to be a free resource, right? To go to the public library and look at their archives.
Right. And so a newspaper like Prattville, which is close to Montgomery or Birmingham, you'd probably want to go to the Montgomery library, and they would have all those local papers on microfilm. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Are there other resources, whether they're cost or free, that you can think of, or maybe not even resources so much, since you're talking about the online ancestry platforms and the newspaper subscriptions, but are there other ways to go about it, or maybe even advice on how to start their research before they do pay for resources?
Well, yes, all of these subscription services have some modicum of usability before you have to pay. So do the free stuff first and see if you're beginning to find some things. And don't just rely on ancestry.com. There are several other services that are in this business. Of course, the Church of Latter-day Saints, it has a deep respect for genealogy, and they have a lot of resources. Another thing that a person should rely on is help from others. And that's a double-edged sword. Once you get into Ancestry, you'll find, oh, here's this family tree that has Uncle Fred in it. Well, where did that family tree come from? Somebody was in there working, and were they only using primary sources to justify or identify their ancestors, or were they taking word from Aunt Sally? And I'm saying Aunt Sally may have told them, well, Uncle Fred was a Cherokee Indian, for example, when in actuality that was just a family legend. But on the other hand, you do get people that are very skilled in this. And so one of the things I rely on is direct messaging. So in Ancestry.com, if somebody says, well, here's a picture of a newspaper article from, the Boston Globe in 1888, I've researched it and found so-and-so and so-and-so. Well, their name appears there. And you can click on their name and send them a follow-up question. You can tell if the person is active on Ancestry because it'll say last logged in 2 days ago or last logged in 5 years ago. So you might find somebody who's active on Ancestry, and generally people are helpful. So if you send them a message, they'll reply back and say, well, I don't have anything further, or yes, you might check so-and-so resource. So using other people, it is very valuable, but you got to be careful about it.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for all of that. If someone wanted to reach out to you to ask questions, would you be open to that? And is LinkedIn maybe the best route, or an email? What's the best way somebody can reach out to you?
Probably the best way would be get yourself an Ancestry account and connect with me on Ancestry.
Nice.
Now, being a professional photographer and small business owner, my email is out there all over the internet, so I don't mind you sharing it. So fine, send me an email. I'm very helpful. But, like everybody else, I get 200 or 300 emails a day, many of which are spam. So I might notice it or I might not. I wouldn't overlook it intentionally, but it might go in that spam folder.
I understand. So if somebody really does want to connect with you around the genealogy, then getting an Ancestry.com account and being able to message you there is really the best option. Okay. Yeah,
That's
great.
Maximize impact with tailored solutions by partnering with Kiffin & Company. Developing your team is an investment, but it doesn't have to be just an expense. Discover more at kiffinandcompany.com and start your journey to effective learning today.
With all your research that you've done on your own family, have you found anything that's just been fascinating or really interesting that you want to share?
Well, I can think of a couple of things. One of the in-laws, so my cousin's husband's father, was a fellow named Abner Sundell, and he was one of the originators of Archie Comics. He was a pulp fiction writer and producer and editor, and he was part of the group that put together Archie Comics.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
Another is actually my Uncle Bud, E. Graham Gibbons. He was a local lawyer there in Mobile, Alabama, and he had a case one time that went all the way to the Supreme Court. One of his clients had been convicted of robbery and been given the death sentence, and his name was Boykin. And Uncle Bud in the Supreme Court said that, well, he hadn't been adequately advised of what his plea was actually going to mean to him. So he didn't understand that he was going to get the death penalty if he pleaded guilty to these robberies. The Supreme Court held in Boykin's favor, and as a consequence of that came the Boykin colloquy. It's also called the plea colloquy. And so in any death penalty case, there has to be a period where the judge and defendant have a conversation just themselves on, do you really understand that you're pleading guilty? And do you understand the consequences of this plea? And is this plea voluntary? And that plea colloquy has been a fixture of all death penalty cases from that point forward.
Wow, very, very cool. Well, I'm ending all of I can't believe our time is already up, but I am ending all of my shows with asking my guests, what is something that you are learning about or that you have interest in right now? Obviously genealogy, but if there's a particular piece of it, or if there's something completely random that you're interested in pursuing learning right now, what would tell us what that would be?
Having several degrees, math degree, education degree, EDD, I'm obviously interested in lifelong learning. So I watch millions of TikTok videos, especially in gardening. I have just learned a lot about gardening in the last few years through YouTube and TikTok, and that's been very helpful. I guess another interest I have is running down used library books. When I was in high school, I read most all of the classics through the public library, and they came in a particular library binding. And so now I'm in the process of finding those books in that binding. They're so old that generally libraries are getting rid of them, and you can find them for sale either on eBay or somewhere. And I stop at lots of libraries and find these books in their for sale bin. I'm researching, collecting all of those classic books in that library binding. The internet has helped me a lot in that.
Yeah, very neat. It seems like you may have missed out on a third career of some sort of researcher.
Well, that when you get your doctorate degree, you do a lot of research. Either you do a postdoc and become a researcher, or like me, I have read a bazillion scholarly journals, and I'm ready to do something that doesn't take quite so much brain power.
Understand. Well, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your experience and your knowledge around genealogy. I hope this will help somebody else find an avenue for their passion, or maybe spark a passion for them.
It's been very enlightening, very entertaining. I recommend it for people, and I wish them good luck. And thank you for the interview.
Wow, that was a really fun interview to do with Dr. St. Clair. Two of the pieces of advice that he gave about preparing for genealogical research are applicable to many areas of interest, including learning and development. So first, going in with an open mind. While the potential here is that you might find something unexpected or even unpleasant in your own family history, the correlation to L&D remains. When you begin looking into the root of a problem or gaps in knowledge or skills in the workplace, you may not like what you find. However, that gives you the foundation to know where to start in the process for improvement. Second, he mentioned the need to be creative when conducting the research, with the example of having to look up names spelled in different ways. With L&D, being creative and innovative, and dare I say, thinking outside the box, can help when designing strategy or content to meet the needs of the learners and the business. One other relevant point to keep in mind is what Dr. St. Clair said about researching details about family legends to determine their validity. We have those kinds of legends with organizations sometimes too. So finding out the origin and the real story behind them can sometimes be surprising, for good or for bad. You've been listening to One More Thing, a radio show on the Power Me Up radio station on iHeartRadio. I'm your host, Kiffin McCoy Albert. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to you tuning in next time as we continue cultivating your mind with one more thing. All right, now that the official interview is over, one thing that I want to share with you all, and it's only being shared here on the YouTube channel, it was not on the radio show version, is that John St. Clair is actually my uncle. So he is my mom's little brother. I have a little brother myself. I know the affinity for little brothers. And he's somebody that I have looked up to for a really long time with his career and his photography skills. He has photographed 3 of mine and 2 of my siblings' weddings, many other family members and things like that. But his work on the genealogy aspect for our family has just been phenomenal. Our family, as he mentioned, we have a big family reunion, and I think I'm probably mentioning it on several of my shows in as part of it as well. But we have such a close-knit, large family unit that we would never have known the different levels of cousins without this reunion. And so now, with the work that, as I call him, Uncle Johnny, has done, this has really been brought to life and a lot of questions answered. And we have so many cool stories about things about people in our family that I don't know. I feel like there may be a show or 2 devoted just to some of the cool stuff that we know. So,
Well,
but
let me jump in, Kiffin, because don't give me all the credit, because when the family reunion folks got together, we have what we call stems. Each of my grandparents' children is called a stem, and they have lots of children. But each of the stems got together and sent a relative, a person in their little stem area, to represent them, and we all work together as a committee to do this genealogy. And lots of input from everybody, and especially Carolyn Holden, who specialized in looking up all of her Irish ancestors. One of our, as you know, one of our aunts was actually a cousin of the siblings in that family, who was raised as a sister, and we all think of her as our Aunt Aileen. And so she was actually, her mother was born and stayed in Ireland, I think. But lots and lots of cousins in Ireland, and Carolyn and her husband Michael have actually gone over there and made friends with all those folks and did an amazing amount of work with the Irish ancestors.
Yeah, very, very neat. Well, I wanted to add that little bonus here on the YouTube version of this, because I appreciate that you went with me, just going, as a professional and a guest, but it's something that I take great pride in. It's understanding my family as well. So I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, you're very kind.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Until next time, keep on learning.